Residents of Tshwane are currently experiencing water cuts and a crippling municipal workers' strike. Mayor Cilliers Brink has refused to budge on union SAMWU's wage demands, further claiming that the city has no funds. But rubbish has gone uncollected in the capital, with home associations now making their own arrangements. And despite SAMWU calling on its members to return to work, it seems this has not happened so far. eNCA reporter Pule Letshwiti-Jones is tracking the story for us, and joining me now to give me, of course, the very latest with regards to what's happening out in Tshwane. Pule, a very warm good morning to you, colleague. What's the latest in the city of Tshwane?
Well, Tumelo, what I can tell you is that the city of Tshwane has been challenged by this strike, which has now entered its sixth week as well. Of course, having a serious knock-on effect on service delivery, particularly around waste collection in the city. Just a week ago, we spoke to some residents and estate managers who told us that they were, forking about 15,000 a week just to have private waste collectors, of course, private companies come in and collect waste in regards to them having to ensure that their properties remain clean as a result of the strike as well. But joining us more to unpack this more for us is the city of Tshwane, Mayor Cilliers Brink. Mr. Brink, thank you very much for chatting to us this morning. Now, we've been here again, and of course, this strike seemingly not seeing to an end. Workers saying that they still demand that salary increment. Do you think we need to end this? Where are we at this particular stage?
So let me just stand aside from this very quickly and just describe how absolutely ridiculous the situation is. We're at bargaining council at the moment, waiting for the outcome of a legal process bound in collective agreement as to the dispute, which is the salary increase. And as that is ongoing, there's still an unprotected strike. So SAMWU is acting in complete bad faith. And I do hope that those making decisions about this matter takes note, because this is bad faith. But Pule, in all honesty, we have seen the strike petering out in important aspects. Water and electricity teams returning to work. There are still instances where folks come to work and then refuse to take work instruction. So they sign the attendance registers, but then they don't go out and give whatever reasons. But we are isolating those instances, and the next phase of our management of the strike is not just to look at the workers, the folks that go out to do the work, but the managers. We've got to act against the managers, because we found in critical aspects that certain of the senior people are either participating in the strike or aiding the strike, and we will act against them, but we are seeing a petering out of the strike.
But how long will this back and forth last? I mean, you were in bargaining council, just like you say, but we still see some services being disrupted across the city, which has a major impact on residents who keep complaining that the turnaround time in terms of responding to service delivery issues is really nowhere to be seen. In fact, it's a nightmare.
It's absolutely unacceptable. The waste collection is the biggest problem, and that is the direct result of the threats and the violence directed at waste collection teams. It's not just the truck that was attacked. And by the way, we are absolutely actively tracking that case, and my office certainly won't let it go. There are certain evidentiary material collected, which we are tracking, and we want arrests to be made in that case, and we won't rest until it happens. But unfortunately, we've seen this disruption. The best we can do is to double down on our efforts to catch up on the waste collection backlog, but also to look at cleaning places like the inner city, because I think that's got a major psychological effect on people, including employees, many of whom work here. And we're going to redouble our efforts to clean the inner city and to redouble law enforcement to protect those teams. But I do think there has been a sense of improvement. The important point is that we are not going to budge. We're going to follow the legal process. We are going to see what the outcome is, but there's going to be no budging in this instance.
Yeah, you speak about legal processes as well. What's the latest with that? What kind of, interventions are you placing in terms of rescuing the city? Is there a court, matter that's currently in session today?
So we expect the outcome of the bargaining council soon, but we're also in court today. The return date of the interdict, this interdict that was granted against the strike action, we're in court today to make that permanent. And so that should strengthen our hand as well. But there's also further cases, contempt of court cases, where actively employees who have been identified will be charged for contempt of court, and we're not going to let that rest.
Yeah, I was about to get into that. Does the status quo remain as well? Those who've received dismissed letters and have been dismissed, does it remain? Are you looking at reinstating them if there were to be any talks between yourselves and SAMWU?
So there's no chance of any political settlement of this matter. You don't settle these things politically. You don't sit around a table. The folks that have been dismissed, if they think they've been unlawfully dismissed, they must go to bargaining council and they must get a judgment. The same with the withholding of salaries. I'm not going to poke my finger into that. The law must follow its course. But the important point, as I mentioned before, managers must also be held to account. Those who've been facilitating or turning a blind eye, we will be acting against them, and hopefully that sends even a more powerful message than the dismissal of 122 officials.
Apart from the bargaining council, have you attempted to speak to SAMWU in trying to see an end to this ongoing strike?
So if there's somebody in front of your house, pelting your house with stones, threatening you and destroying the neighborhood, you're not going to go out and say, oh, how can we negotiate? There must be law enforcement consequences for those who break the law, and we will see them at bargaining council. That's the official process. Once you step out of that, you signal that you're weak, you signal that anything goes. And it's not about my ego or the city manager or the city. It's about the residents whose services have been disrupted. We must stand our ground, and we'll talk to SAMWU, but we'll talk to them in court. We'll talk to them at bargaining council about this particular dispute.
There's been concerns and, of course, talk around the city being placed under administration. Have you received any directives from the provincial government regarding this as well?
We've received no directives from the provincial government. I was approached about a week ago by a journalist who had a source that said that the province is considering administration. Of course, it's very difficult post the 2020 judgment of the Constitutional Court, where the city was placed under administration in an attempt to reverse the election outcome. It's become more difficult for provinces to do that. But it's also important that province determines what does it want to achieve. Does it want to intervene here so as to pay salaries? You've seen the Sunday Times. You've seen that even national government, provincial government is in trouble. Even they can't afford the salary increases that they've been granted. So administration would be a dead end for anyone in the city. In fact, it will be exceptionally harmful, and we will fight it with everything we have left.
Cilliers, just before you go, last time I spoke to you, there was an issue around yourselves and Rand Water as well. Obviously, this speaking to service delivery concerns. What's the matter between yourselves and Rand Water? There seems to be a back and forth as well in terms of also how communication is bad when coming to maintenance plans in the city.
So there are two critical issues for us. The one is that Rand Water has an obligation to maintain a certain level of pressure. If they don't, then reservoirs run dry. That is a contractual obligation. We'll track that. The second is the maintenance issues on Rand Water's side. We asked, please notify us. I have got a very good relationship with the Minister of Water. On Sunday, we got together and he facilitated an interaction between Rand Water and ourselves. We're now working together better. I think many of the statements in the media are historical issues between the city and Rand Water, but I do think there's a better attempt at both sides to work together to resolve it, because we realize that it's not about us, it's not about them, it's about the end-use consumers, the folks who want water in the taps.
Do you continue to witness a growing concern around workers being intimidated, particularly those who are working at the depots, those who are responsible for using trucks, which will then ensure proper waste collection in the city?
So there is a concern about that, and we continue to assess that risk. But as I say, much of the strike has petered out. I think in many instances you now find folks using that as an excuse to say we don't want to work because we're afraid of being attacked. We must obviously take those risks very seriously on a case-by-case basis, but I don't think it's getting worse. I think it's getting better, even though the residents aren't experiencing that yet.
Cilliers, I think City of Tshwane residents may want to know. I might have asked you this, but they really want to know. When will we see an end to the strike? When will one party budge? I know the city says it doesn't have money, but what kind of interim or temporary solutions can be put in place to ensure the successful ending of the strike and ensure that services continue? Because we continuously get calls as journalists from residents in Soshanguve, Pretoria East, complaining about services. It's a concern, and some may be thinking that there's a bit of politicking that's happening here as well.
There definitely is politicking, and I think the risk is that there's a union elite who are driving continued participation in the strike. And unfortunately, when folks get dismissed, you don't see that elite. You don't see them going to court fighting the dismissals. They're using people as cannon fodder. So I am very concerned that there are political and economic interests that are driving the strike. You've mentioned administration. I definitely think that there are people who will benefit economically if the Gauteng provincial government is in charge of the city. They will benefit economically, and workers are used as cannon fodder. So that we have to be clear about. At the same time, we are seeing the petering out of the strike. I expect the strike to clear up completely within the next month.
Would you say this is sabotage to the city's economy as well?
Absolute sabotage to the city's economy. If you look at the streets, if you look at the active attempts to start fires at dump sites, just to set fire to trash in the streets, it is a very concerted effort to make the city look bad, to inconvenience residents, to disrupt services. But the important point I want to emphasize is that these folks aren't winning. They could, of course, still win in a certain scenario. If we're placed under administration, we're forced to pay increases we can't afford, then there will be terrible consequences. But my promise to the residents is I will keep on fighting for a fair deal, for a productive workforce, for services delivered, for wages that we can afford, for a city of Tshwane that exists in 10 years' time, that doesn't look like Botla and these other places that have been ruined by trade unions like SAMWU.
Mr. Brink, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks very much, Pule.
That's Cilliers Brink, the Mayor of Tshwane. Quite a very firm message there, Dumelo, saying that he will continue to ensure that they fight back and push back against the unprotected SAMWU strike, which is, by the way, now entering its 6th week and having a serious knock-on effect on services in the capital city.
Yeah, and in as much as we do get, a bit of context from the mayor's perspective, Pule, in terms of, what exactly could be the motive behind the strike, either politically, whether it's sabotage. I think the residents just want to know, as you've asked, colleague, the timelines, because they're the ones heavily inconvenienced, having to even resort to home associations and private companies, charging them exorbitant prices just to, of course, collect some of the waste and also intervene with some of the delivery. So I suppose that month that he gave, that's the anticipated end of the strike. We'll have to wait and see. It didn't sound convincing that it could be ending in a month, but I'm sure it's the hope of the mayor. But we'll continue to keep a close eye on Tshwane, because sure, you can imagine when it comes to service delivery and the inconvenience there of some of the residents. Rubbish hasn't been collected in the capital for some time now. And as mentioned before, home associations are making their own arrangements, of course, and this at the expense of residents, while SAMWU and the city try to find common ground with regards to the strike. Pule Letshwiti-Jones, eNCA reporter, keeping a close eye, and will give us updates as and when they come.